What's up, Canes fans? Welcome to the CanesInSight Daily Podcast powered by Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. We have a time, 3:30 p.m., Miami taking on the Florida Gators. We're going to break down, really comparing Miami and Florida and Florida State, Miami's two biggest games this year, position by position. I saw a tweet that was made by Miami and Florida State writers. It kind of inspired me, and I wanted to break down who has the best players at each position on offense, where Miami's roster is pretty much set after the portal has closed. First, want to talk about a roster that is always loaded, Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. If you or someone you care about has been injured in an accident, dial 1-800-747-FREE, 1-800-747-3733, and take back control of your life with Anajar and Levine. Pete, get in here. So starting off, we got the time. We know the date, August 31st. Now we got the time, 3:30 p.m., Miami, Florida, right after the Clemson-Georgia game. Enough time for folks to get liquored up, but the sun's still going to be shining. It's not going to be nighttime. So what do you think about that 3:30 p.m. start?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, to me, that's the quintessential college football Saturday start time. Like you said, everyone's going to be excited in the morning. The energy is going to be building up, but it'll be nice to go out on the town in Gainesville celebrating on a Saturday night, right? I'd prefer that because everything closes early anyways if it was a night game, so we wouldn't have a chance to parade around the town. So that's why I like the 3:30 start.
No, I love it. I totally agree. So I saw a tweet that got my mind racing a little bit about this game and the FSU game, and this was a tweet which, Pete, you have it pulled up. Shout out to people who made it. It was you think of the names on the tweet. So it was an FSU writer and a Miami writer. They basically put together the best player at each position in state for Miami, Florida State, and UF. It got a lot of traction on Twitter. I agree with a lot of the names, don't agree with some of them, or at least have some questions on some of them. So we'll be breaking down how Miami compares to Florida State and UF position by position.
Yeah, so it was from Canes Insider. And we'll start right off the bat here at the quarterback position. Obviously, couple transfer. Well, all three of these guys are transfers, but Graham Mertz has been at Florida for a couple years now. Cam Ward, obviously coming over from Washington State. DJ Uiagalelei coming from Oregon State. And we have the stats up here across the board. Cam Ward, with the most impressive numbers of the three of them, but Mertz doing a really good job there protecting the football, only those 3 interceptions last year. D, your thoughts on this group?
So first thing that jumps out, like you said, all three are transfers. I've been a big proponent of transfer quarterbacks being the way of the future. Get high upside, cheap arms in high school, get guys in the portal that are proven or that have a little bit of dust on them, but still have a lot of upside. All three of these teams did that. I think clearly, just if you look at market value, who's getting paid the most, who had the most interest, who had the most NFL interest, I think you put Cam Ward on top of this list. He by far had the most yards, 3,735 yards passing. He had more of a responsibility on his team to throw the ball. Washington State had no running game in the 120s and rushing. So we broke this down on yesterday's show, or on Friday's show, I think, just going through some of the offensive stats. Cam Ward completely carried his team. They couldn't pass protect. They couldn't run the ball. He threw it more than anybody, and he still protected the ball with only 7 INTs. That 3,735 yards, if he does that at Miami, he's breaking Miami's single season passing record, which is incredibly still held by Bernie Kosar 40 years later. So I think looking at this list, Cam Ward was required to do the most at Washington State. He did the most. The only guys that threw for more yards than him, those guys were all names, brand names. You're talking about the Jaden Daniels, the Caleb Williamses, the Bo Nixes of the worlds, guys like that really rank in the high echelon of the country. Dylan Gabriel, another one.
And we'll get into it now as we continue through here, but you'd expect him to have better offensive line and weapons surrounding him as well.
Oh, 100%. Michael Penix, another one in that list of guys that threw for more yards than Cam Ward. I think Washington State was 6th in the country in passing yards per game, and they were behind LSU, USC, Oregon, Washington, and I believe Oklahoma with Dylan Gabriel. So, brand names all across, and he had no running game and no offensive line when he put up those numbers. So clearly, I think the market spoke pretty obviously that Cam Ward was the hottest commodity of these three. when you look at DJ and you pronounce the name because you had it perfect.
Uyangalele.
Unbelievable. So with him, the thing that jumps out, 57% completion percentage. He is the least accurate passer of this group. He did have a large yards per attempt and large per completion because when he does throw the ball, typically off play action at Oregon State, and probably going to be the same thing at Florida State, he is going down the field. So he does have the ability to challenge you deep with that big arm, the big size, the ability to see over the line. That play action is, I think, where he lives. But the glaring number here, to me, that 57% completion percentage.
Yeah, definitely. And we saw it in the spring game, right? We saw some issues there as well, which it's a spring game, but definitely something to keep an eye on there in Tallahassee. I will say this, Dee, and I think it's really a big disclaimer that goes with anything we talk about FSU-wise is Norvell does a really good job of getting the most out of what he has. Granted, had NFL talent there offensively. Obviously, Jordan Travis gets drafted, Coleman, Johnny Wilson late, but really there was legit NFL talent there. I still believe, though, Norvell does a really good job scheming up. And although they don't have as much proven talent as, again, we'll continue to get to here in terms of production, I'm interested to see what DJ does this year with, a coach who's savvy at getting the most out of the guys around them.
Yeah, it'll be different this year. Jordan Travis was not the most accurate guy. I was always a fan going back to high school, but he was not the most accurate guy, just like DJ. I think the difference with Travis is, number one, he was more athletic. So a lot of DJ's accuracy issues from what I've seen studying him are when he's forced to move, like a lot of big kind of pocket passers, oversized pocket passers, when they have to move, their accuracy drops precipitously. Travis is comfortable moving around. Also, Travis had two receivers that really expanded the strike zone for him with Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman, big guys, large catch radius, so he didn't need to be precise. I think with DJ losing those two guys, his receivers are going to be more downfield threats, more speed threats. So it's going to be about his deep ball and being able to have enough time, maybe off play action, to set up and then chuck it down the field. Because I don't think these receivers are going to stretch the target range, the strike zone, like Jordan Travis's receivers did for him.
Definitely. Now, Graham Mertz at Florida, you and I have been pretty complimentary of him. Recently, we did a breakdown, somewhat an early look at Miami and Florida, at least talent-wise. And Mertz is a guy that I think is, especially for a game one scenario, we all have high hopes for Cam Ward, but it's still the first game, live action in the orange and green, right? Mertz now has been there for a couple years. Again, that 20 touchdown to 3 interception ratio, not the most explosive guy, but a little bit more athletic than people give him credit for, and just finds the open receiver, doesn't try to do too much with it.
Yeah, very efficient. Look at the stats, 20 touchdowns, 3 picks, 73% completion. I think he's a very, very good game manager. He was a big recruit out of high school, the biggest recruit out of all these guys. So I guess DJ was a big recruit too, but he was a 5-star player. Cam Moore was actually the least recruited out of high school and the most recruited out of the portal. Interestingly enough, again, what do I say about high school arms? Be very, very careful, because both DJ and Graham Mertz, 5-star type players who did not make it with their first team. So with Mertz, efficient. He did not have very good protection, and he didn't fall apart. I think he did a nice job standing tall and making plays despite the lack of protection. But I think the difference between Mertz and Ward is just that dynamic ability. I don't think Graham Mertz, if you put Graham Mertz at Washington State, he's not going to elevate that team the same way Cam Ward did with his lateral quickness, ability to get out of the pocket and make things happen. So I think that's the difference there. All three guys are going to be on NFL radars. I've heard some people say DJ is more a tight end for the NFL. I think Rick Spielman said that on one of these podcasts, former NFL GM. He sees DJ as a tight end. But I think all three of these guys will at least be in a camp next year. Cam Ward, most likely to be drafted high. Graham Mertz, I could see as a riser if he has a good year with this offense. And DJ, with his size and arm strength, will be in the mix. So good group of transfer quarterbacks. I think, though, Miami clearly comes out on top.
Moving along here, next up, running back position. Obviously another big ticket item for Miami this offseason. Damian Martinez coming over from Oregon State, Florida State, Roydell Williams. And, everything coming out of Tallahassee this spring has been it's going to be running back by committee. Williams coming over from Alabama, I think probably has the highest upside there. Lawrence Toafili, been there for a few years. He's a guy who's a solid back for them as well. But I think Williams probably is their highest ceiling guy. So we have him there as the highlighted back. And then Montrell Johnson for Florida. Obviously, they lose ETN in the offseason. So that was a big loss for them. But again, by the numbers here, Miami with the most proven returner in Damian Martinez.
Yeah, Miami has the big-time guy in this group. I think it's a pretty solid group of backs. They're similar in many respects, physical backs with some size, but the biggest and most productive and most explosive, by the way, at least by the stats of this group, Damian Martinez. You just look at this, Montrell Johnson, Louisiana transfer originally. He's part of a rotation last year with Trevor Etienne, 817 yards, 5.4 yards per, 5 touchdowns. Good stats. Roydell Williams on a very good Alabama team. 111 carries, 560 yards, 5 per carry, 5 touchdowns. Now I go to Damian Martinez, who really was the focal point of that Oregon State offense with DJ not being the most dynamic quarterback. 1,185 yards, 6.1 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns, had 39 runs over 10 yards. I want to say he's had 8 runs over 40 yards since he got on campus at Oregon State. He's an 18 and 19-year-old, by the way, his first 2 years. So he's a young guy. I think younger than the other two. So really just, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the size, Martinez hasn't beat on total production. He's more explosive in terms of long runs and yards per carry. And he's getting in paydirt faster. So I think, neither of these guys to me is a great receiver. If you're just looking at running back, I don't see how you make an argument that any of these guys rank over Martinez.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, and again, we've talked about it. The offensive line, which we're going to get to a little bit more in depth here in a moment, but the offensive line for Miami has to be looked at as a huge positive here. Florida, that's a huge question mark for them. Florida State, I think, should be pretty solid. Alex Atkins has done a good job up there the last couple of years with that group, but you got to factor that into the equation here when talking about the backs.
Yeah, we'll get to that one in a second because I think Miami has another clear advantage there. So real quick, want to talk to you about Caneswear and caneswear.com. Panthers are rolling. Big comeback win against the Bruins. Nobody's got more Panther stuff than caneswear.com or the store in Davie. So check it out on caneswear.com. You can go to CanesInsight.com. We have a tab for Caneswear, or you can just go to the store and see all the Panther stuff for yourself. We got the Rat here in studio. Nothing better for the Florida Panthers than caneswear.com.
I'll stop you real quick here, kind of intermission. Here's the list that we were originally talking about from Canes Insider. And again, we're kind of halfway through here looking at the offense. And we're not going to go position by position on offensive line, but this list has Ward and Martinez as the top running backs, in terms of the big three, you could say. And now we'll be getting into the receivers and the tight ends here, but I just wanted to show the tweet. So give them some props there. But moving along here into the wide receiver position, which is probably, we've been very excited about this group, but probably the best returning group for Miami in a while. I can't put a year on it, but by the numbers, especially bringing Sam Brown in from Houston, really, you look at the numbers stacked up against the returning guys from Florida State and Florida, and it on paper looks like a big advantage.
It's not even close. I mean, really, when you put these numbers up, it is shocking, quite frankly, to see the disparity between Miami's returning production at the wide receiver position compared to these other schools. And it's not like, FSU and Florida are trotting out 5-star high school kids that just sat there, waited their turn. A lot of these guys have a lot of question marks, or they're just limited upside guys. So I think this is a major position of strength for Miami. Just going through the numbers, Xavier Restrepo, of course, one of the top slots in the country, 85 catches, 1,092 yards, 6 touchdowns. Just for perspective, that is, almost double all of FSU's combined top 3 guys. You could combine all FSU's top 3 guys and then double them, and I still don't think they meet Restrepo. And that's pretty much equals Florida's top 3 guys. So that's Restrepo alone. He was extremely productive, and that was without Cam Ward, who, as you saw in the spring game, was targeting him with a lot of success. Sam Brown from Houston, Didn't have the best quarterback situation, had some erratic play there. 62 catches, 815 yards, 3 touchdowns. Again, none of these guys came close to 800 yards. You had Eugene Wilson with 538, no one else close to Wilson of Florida and Florida State's receivers. So Sam Brown, significantly more productive than all those guys. And then Jacoby George, same thing, 57 catches, 864 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's one I think is really going to benefit from Cam Ward. I thought TBD and him, they had times where they connected. Sometimes they didn't. Cam Ward hit him for a touchdown in the spring game. And I think George most resembles the receivers that Cam Ward had at Washington State. He loves to throw those 50-50 balls down the field. Jacoby George, his special talent, in my opinion, is tracking the ball. He's like a great center fielder when it comes to maybe not mossing guys, although he has some of that, but really just being able to time it and track the ball. You saw it against Florida State, his long touchdown. He has a great sense of that. And I think that's where Cam Ward really excels, throwing it down the field, throwing it away from the receiver, the defensive back, but with enough space that the receiver can go under it. So there's a fit there in Jacoby George. He was super productive with TVD, second leading returning receiver in the ACC. I think Cam Ward takes his game to another level. So Miami, clearly the most production coming back before we go into Florida State and Florida, what they got.
Yeah, and look, this not to say, which I mentioned when we talked about Florida-Miami matchups earlier this year, it's not to say there's not talent on either of these sides, right? You look at Florida State, Malik Benson is an interesting one coming over from Bama. You understand, the receiver talent over there. A lot of it could just be ability to get on the field and with more targets, who knows what he does. Hakeem Williams obviously was a big recruit, didn't have much success last year, but with the guys in front of him with a similar skill set, you would think, right? The bigger body receiver obviously was, he didn't have many opportunities there. And then Florida, Khalil Jackson, a guy who saw a big jump in production last year, 21 receptions, but a bigger body receiver, has some juice. Former walk-on, right? But to me is a guy who could be a potential mismatch problem. So again, by the numbers, definitely looks like Miami has the edge here. It doesn't look like it. They do have the edge, but not to say there isn't, potential talent at these other spots, but Miami in a good spot there for sure.
Yeah, let's go through some of these guys. You mentioned FSU. I'll go through the stats. Ja'Kai Douglas, he's an older kid, 2020, was a low 4-star on the composite, 3-star 247. Guy played a lot of positions. He was an 1107 kid in the 100, so had some decent speed, 5'9", 180, 86, I believe, coming out. He had 14 catches last year, 243 yards, 0 touchdowns. Clearly fell behind in the pecking order behind Coleman, Wilson, and Bell, but made a few catches. Hakeem Williams, a disappointment as a 5-star true freshman, 5 catches, 80 yards, 1 TD. I think they're sending him to an outside receiver specialist. The key with him is going to be working on his craft. He's big, he's athletic. I think he was a swimmer in high school. So he has an unusual athletic background. I think played basketball as well. But the nuances of receiver, that's where he needs help. And again, I'm told he's going to an outside coach this summer, but did not look great in the spring game. I don't believe he had a ton of production in spring football based on what I've read. So I think he's a wild card. He can hit you with an 80-yard catch and run if you're not ready. But to this point has not been productive. And then Malik Benson, I agree, is the top guy with his speed, deep threat, originally from junior college, went to Alabama, now going to Florida State. Last year, 13 catches, 162 yards, 1 touchdown. But the deep speed is there and fits in with the play action game of DJ. If he wants to chuck it down the field, Benson has the speed to get down the field and make those kind of plays. Question is he going to be giving you the contested catch ability, the reliability of Coleman and Wilson when they did get one-on-one matchups? Florida, and Pete, I know you like some of these guys. Eugene Wilson, 61 catches, 538 yards, 6 touchdowns. So not great stats from Eugene Wilson, but I do agree that this was a true freshman last year. I do agree he's a player. He's a high-end SEC guy. I think his production exponentially goes up this year. You're talking about Shamir Dyke, Wisconsin transfer, 19 catches, 328 yards, 1 touchdown last year. And the guy you like from the spring game, Pete, Khalil Jackson, 21 catches, 251 yards, 1 touchdown. Again, Miami, all 3 of their guys were over 800 yards, Restrepo over 1,000. So the production is not the same, but there's some interesting talent in this group.
Certainly. Now, as we look at tight end, it's a little bit flipped here for Miami, as Elijah Arroyo as the returning guy. We understand he's been dealing with his injury issues, only had 1 reception last year, and I think only has 5 receptions in each of the other 2 years, right? So the production on paper is not there, but you understand the talent that he is, fully healthy now, and had a great spring, looked like himself, and it should be a big part of this offense for Miami.
Yeah, and look, I understand putting him probably third on this list just because of the returning production, because of the injuries. I get it. That's why he wouldn't be the first tight end. But if I'm picking, maybe I'm biased, but I also saw this guy in spring up close and talked to a lot of people around the program that have been around the SEC and have been around big time schools, been around NFL players a ton. I would pick Arroyo first off this. Personally, I wouldn't put him there for purposes of making a list because he's been injured. He hasn't produced. But if you ask me to pick a player here, Arroyo, to me, is the most talented. He's the highest rated of the crew coming out of high school. Kyle Morlock for FSU is a transfer from Shorter, a smaller school. Arliss Boardingham, who's probably the best on paper right now. He was a high 3-star recruit on the composite. Again, I put those two ahead of him in terms of production. You see the numbers. Both of those guys were in the 250, 289-yard range. Arroyo really didn't do anything last year, was hurt the last 2 years. But I do think talent-wise, Arroyo, the higher rated player, the guy that in spring looked sensational with his size and athletic ability, his ability to block as well. I would place that bet, but I'd understand that you're giving up odds to the other two who are more productive.
Certainly. Now, looking at offensive line, used a couple different numbers here from teamrankings.com to sort of quantify the production, I guess you could call it, from the offensive line. And, D, I'll let you go through it first, the QB sack percentage.
Yeah, so this is my favorite stat for pass protection. Again, teamrankings.com. They don't use FCS numbers, those kind of cupcake games. So to me, it's the best stat service is what I use for all these stats. Sack percentage is really the percentage of dropbacks when you're getting sacked. The reason it's a good stat is because if you run the ball 100 times, you're not going to get sacked. But that doesn't necessarily explain your pass protection quality. So teams that throw a ton might have great pass protection, but they're going to give up some sacks just because of the sheer volume of dropbacks. So sack percentage is just a percentage to take all that away. Miami, which passed a lot last year, 15th in the country in sack percentage, 3.6% of the dropbacks resulted in sacks. Very good number for the Miami Hurricanes. FSU with Jordan Travis, 49th in the country, 5.4% sack percentage. So a higher sack percentage, that means they rank lower, 49th, pretty middle of the road. UF was horrible. Their offensive line was egregiously bad last year, 115th in sack percentage, 10.86% of their dropbacks. Graham Mertz was getting sacked. So I know they added some players in the portal. No one of really high esteem like a Matt Lee or Javion Cohen that were big ticket items, but they've added guys that should be improvements in the portal. Their left tackle was injured, Austin Barber. They should be getting him back. He was there during the season, but he got injured towards the end. They should be getting him back closer to camp from what I understand. So that to me is a glaring area for UF that they need to get better at. They're going to be going against a pretty nasty pass rush for the Miami Hurricanes with Ruben Bain, Messidor, Elijah Alston. So, pass protection wise, and we're going to go through the individuals in a second. I think it's pretty clear that Miami has the best pass protection line in the state. Yeah.
And it's interesting, D, because you remember the last time Miami and Florida played, what was the difference in that game? Zion Nelson, a true freshman who was probably weighing 275, 280 pounds, soaking wet, right? He had to start that game and, got the quarterback beat up a little bit there. So,
and John Campbell's still starting in the SEC.
Yeah.
So both those guys still have eligibility, and we're talking about 2019. So that's how young Miami was when they went up to Gainesville, going against John Greenard, who's had a great career in the pros, and a pretty tough Gator pass rush that cost Miami the game. I think the roles are flipped a little bit when it comes to the pass protection going up to Gainesville August 31st.
And look, D, we've already done a couple of these sort of head-to-head analysis, and we're going to be doing more of this stuff throughout the summer. We're excited now. We have the game time to look forward to, but it's going to be a fun summer here on Canes Insight as we look forward to that game in Gainesville week 1. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel. D, anything else?
Yeah, I want to get into a couple things real quick before we let everybody go. Yards per rush, another metric to evaluate the offensive line's performance, this time in run blocking. Again, I like the kind of these rate type stats because a team that runs the ball a lot is going to have a higher yards per game just because of the attempts. I want to see how efficient the teams are when they run. Miami, 20th in yards per carry, 5.0 yards per carry, despite really not having an explosive back like Martinez. They just consistently blocked it up. FSU, 56th with Trey Benson, who was a high-end back. So they were a disappointing run game last year. I think the offensive line had more to do with it than the backs. 4.4 yards a carry. Florida, again, offensive line picking up bottom here. 72nd in the country, 4.1 yards per carry, despite having good backs. One thing that I noticed going back and watching Florida in particular is a lot of – I watched them against Missouri. I watched them against some other top teams. A lot of their explosive plays came from Ricky Pearsall, the first-round pick of the 49ers, and Trevor Etienne, who signed with the Georgia Bulldogs as a transfer. Again, first-round Georgia Bulldogs. These guys kind of went up in the world a little bit after leaving Florida. I think they're going to miss that explosive element. Montrell Johnson, a very good back, but I don't think he's as explosive as Etienne. And Pearsall really brought something unique as a first-round talent to that wide receiver room that I don't know is being replaced. So that was something that really jumped out to me. Going through, I know the tweet, Pete, if you could put the tweet back up, had the different offensive linemen ranked in the state, which I thought was a pretty good list. Basically, Miami's top, and the positions are kind of mixed up because these guys play multiple spots. But basically, Miami's top 3 offensive linemen, Jalen Rivers, Inez Cooper, Francis Mauigoa, were all listed among the top 5. I would agree with that. I think they're the 3 best linemen in the state. I personally think they're 3 of the best linemen in the country. Darius Washington, a guy that Miami recruited, I believe out of the Pensacola area, out of high school, signed with Florida State, a little bit more of a developmental guy, but really turned into a good player. I think he's a good choice there, a tackle. And then Jake Slaughter for UF, who's an interesting guy. I believe he's from Ocala. He's someone who didn't start the season. Kingsley Agoakan, who I think is in a camp, I believe he's in a camp in the NFL, was a starting center. He got hurt. This guy came in and played the last 9 or so games, graded out top 10 according to Pro Football Focus, which is why he's listed as a center here. It's interesting choice. I could see it watching him. He's very athletic. He has good technique. He gets to the second level well. I think his power and overall size is probably lacking a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see if Miami can exploit that with a guy like CJ Clark and knock Slaughter back because he's not the most physical guy. You do have Zach Carpenter for the Hurricanes, who was honorable mention All Big Ten. Maurice Smith for FSU, honorable mention All ACC. He's someone that we liked, Pete, coming out of Central. Mm-hmm. He was a tackle at that time. We all thought he should have been Miami center. Miami ended up taking Ja'Kai Clark. I think Maurice Smith turned out to be the better player there for Florida State. So center's a tricky one. I agree with the other choices. I could see why they picked Slaughter, but I think Miami and FSU both have a case to have the best center in the state.
Definitely. And look, again, we've had the tweet up here, Canes Insider. Good job with that list. It's a Canes guy putting it together. So a little bit of bias, I'm sure. But as we just went through it here, pretty spot on, it looks like.
Yeah, he put some interesting categories too. He put fullback, which he listed Elijah Lofton. I'm not going to push back on that. I think the guy is a superstar. I'm a huge fan of his. He also had scat back Jalen Lucas from Florida State, who's an Indiana transfer. And I agree he has the most production last year for that position, 275 yards. Not a ton of production, really, but more than the guy I'm going to list. But if you compare Chris Johnson of the Miami Hurricanes to Jalen Lucas, he's bigger. Jalen Lucas is 5'9", 175. Chris Johnson is closer to 180, 190, and he's taller. If you look at speed, I believe Jalen Lucas's PR was a win-aided 10.6, was in the 11s otherwise. Chris Johnson, 10.2, one of the fastest players, if not the fastest players in the nation. So, Lucas has more returning production, not a ton, but 275 yards. Johnson really didn't play much. I could see by the end of the year, Chris Johnson really emerging as an impact. They use the term scat back, but as a kind of complementary change of pace back, I think Chris Johnson has the upside to really move past these other guys and add an explosive dimension that Florida and Florida State lack.
Again, guys, like this video, subscribe to the Canes Insight channel, and check out CanesInsight.com. Best forums in the Miami Hurricanes, interweb space, and I think some of the best forums around. Regardless, completely free. Once again, go sign up. like, subscribe. D, great information as always. You got anything else here?
No, it's the 6.9 million posts and counting on Canes Insight forums. We're going to be fighting about the Noles and the Gators and the Canes all summer. So check it out. That's going to be a lot of fun. It'll get you through the summer, get you right to August 31st at 3:30 p.m.
Go Canes.
Go Canes.